Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. And I think the first order of business is I ask you to call a roll call.
Certainly. Member Minor.
Here.
Member Nickel.
Here.
Member Church.
Here.
Member Liebolt is absent. Chair Bergman.
Here.
Or you have a quorum.
Okay, great. I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. It's great to finally get together and put our first meeting together with me at the head. It's a little surprising. You'll have to bear with me. So the first thing we need to do is have a consideration of the June 8th meeting minutes. Does anybody have any changes or any alterations?
I just have one quick one on page 4. It's the first, second, third, fourth paragraph. It's Member Church who very astutely noticed the front door and the architectural interest of it, so instead of Nickel.
Okay. Any other changes? Can I have a motion to,
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? And we have some minutes. Okay, and then item 3, the non-agenda items. We allot 15 minutes for anybody who wants to speak to us this evening. We don't seem to have many guests. Are we on, this is not a Zoom meeting.
We are on Zoom.
Oh, we're on Zoom?
Right up there on the screen, but
Okay.
we don't have anyone participating online at this time.
So we don't have any Zoom meetings, so we can pass through item number 3. Number 4, we get to the public hearing for the historic landmark nomination of 618 Maple Avenue.
Certainly. And in this instance, the village's administrative intern, Eric Mueller, has prepared the staff memorandum, and I've asked him to present it for you.
Great. Yes, please give us your report.
All right, so this is a landmark application for 618 Maple Avenue. The applicants are Charles and Vanessa Clark. Vanessa is here today. This building is one of 24 previously identified by the HPC as representing the highest priorities for preservation in the village, according to the resolution from 2021. And today you will be making a decision on whether or not to recommend it to the village board for preservation. And with it, you have 4 options. The first will be a continuation, where you move to continue the hearing to the next regular meeting. The second is an approval, recommending it to the board for approval. The third is an approval with modifications. So recommending it to the board for approval, but with some modifications that you've made to it. And the fourth and final is denying it for landmark preservation.
Great. So do I call a public hearing now? Or have we?
Yeah, you don't need to do anything formal to open the hearing. I mean, it's open, but anyone aside from staff or the commissioners that wants to participate in the hearing should have the oath administered to them.
Okay. And so I'm anticipating that one or both of you will speak. So may I ask you to take the oath? So if you'll raise your right hand, do you swear to fully tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Great. Wonderful. Can one of you come and give us a synopsis of the house and give us a description of the property?
You can fill in where needed.
Vanessa, we assume you know something about the house.
My name is Rob Douglas, architect here locally in town. And first of all, are the images available?
We're pulling them up right now, Mr.
Okay,
Douglas.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, the house is on the corner of Maple and North Avenue. Tomlinson is the architect of this house. I believe it's dated 1911. Same architect who did Village Hall here. And it's a great example of the Prairie School architecture of that time period. Tomlinson was worked at one time with Frank Lloyd Wright, so obviously this is where a lot of the Prairie School characteristics came from with this design, with, you know, these large projecting gables, and the very strong horizontal lines the building provides. And I'll be honest with you too, just to let you know, and you could see it in the packet here. The homeowners want to be able to landmark this home. They also would like to put an addition onto the garage, and so that's something for consideration here too, as far as historic preservation support in the redesign of the garage to try to make it more compatible with the main house. That garage was built, I believe, in the late 90s, and it has a hip roof on it. It has some materials that are similar, but the form of the garage has really got nothing to do with the main building itself. So, but I just want to be, you know, transparent about that we're seeking this preservation designation, and with that, the support to seek a building bulk variance and a height variance on the garage. So, might as well start moving through these slides. Plata survey, I don't think I have to worry about that so much right now, but it's, the next slide is the site plan that was generated from the plat, just showing where the setback lines are, and the garage, which is down on the south end. And it's a little hard to see there, but the poche and kind of a pink color at the very bottom is a pre-existing nonconformance of that garage. So it does have a pre-existing condition on that. Go to the next slide. Just some numbers running on the property, basically all the setbacks, lot size, and basically the maximum allowable floor area is 4,459 square feet. And currently the building is conforming to that. The next page, or slide I should say, it's at 4522 right now. And with the proposed addition, we would be adding onto the building, it would be 655 over the bulk, which is approximately 13%. And the excess of the limit on the garage height for any detached structure at the back of a lot, it's allowed to go up to 17 feet. And this would be now a gabled roof running east-west, and it would encroach 3 feet into that limit. Next slide. So just another photograph of the southern portion of the house with the garage off to the left. As I said, it has similar detailing, but the massing of it is something that really sings a different tune. Next slide. The elevation of the east side of the building and showing the relationship of these two structures. And you can see all the common characteristics to the prairie style. Next slide. And that's just a sectional cut through the garage itself as it exists today, and then the south elevation. Next slide. And this is the garage itself. It's utilitarian, I would say, in nature. Hipped roof on the structure. Next slide, please. This is what's being proposed with the building, is to pick up on the gables that are on the main house and to create basically a little brother to the main house. And also this is about expanding into a second floor above the garage for a home office, which is, as we all know, quite common these days, working from home and remotely. And so with that in mind, we looked at as far as adding a second floor to it to make it compatible to the character of the main house.
If you go back to the very first picture that was shown,
Harry, why don't you come up here if you want to? Okay.
We really need you to speak at the mic.
Actually, you need to come up and speak into the microphone. Our vast television audience wants to hear you.
great. So what's always bothered me about the house was I've never understood, and I love our house. We both, my husband and I, love our house, and we do everything to try and preserve it. And the interiors, you're all invited to come see it if you want to. We've stuck to prairie style, everything, and we have done a lot of renovation on the interiors to make it a livable house going forward, because it really wasn't when we moved in. We did a lot of things to it. We've done a lot over 21 years. But you can see where the garage falls off. They don't match at all. It's like this house here and then a garage, and I still don't understand quite why they did that. But when you look at Rob's proposed sketch that he just showed a few minutes ago, it's hard to see in a picture, but I think it would balance really nicely and look like it always was there. It doesn't look like something that would be a monstrosity or
Out of
something.
place, yeah.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we go on to the next slide, that's a sectional cut through the interior of the second floor. We're going to actually lower the floor height of that garage. So it'll be a conventional 7-foot garage door. That's what is hanging on the underside of the floor plate there. So we can make sure we have a functional garage. And that was trying to minimize the height as much as possible. But to try to get it compatible with the building next door, dropping that ridge down, well, first of all, getting a shallower slope would not be the right thing to do with the character of the main building, but dropping that ridge height down just makes that space just so compact. So that's why the roof is at the height it is. You can see there's a collar tie that runs across just above the window, so we can keep this an open space up there. So how it's going to be defined on the interior has not been fully investigated at this point. I think what we feel is more important is to make sure that we're going to be able to do this and without investing too much time and money into it. Next slide. And as you can see what we're doing here, these 2D drawings do have some distortion on them, but I think what we're trying to do here is pick up on the horizontal lines of the main house. We're considering at this point to have brick at the first floor level, then a sill that wraps around the building, and then stucco up above, the same as the main house. That's not how the garage is done currently. And then introduction of a staircase in the garage so that one can gain access to the second floor. And I think that's pretty much it on the graphics. And, you know, we're doing this twofold. I mean, we're obviously want to get historic designation on the building. We feel that's certainly the right thing to do. But also the fact that the village did pass an ordinance, I think it went through last spring, about historically designated buildings, and to allow these buildings, in the spirit of trying to save them and preserve them, to give the PCZBA more latitude in their considerations of any sort of variances that might be considered. So, so that's actually a part of our package, is that we, assuming we get approved here, we will go in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, or the PCZBA, seeking a variance request. 13% is not a big number. I think the zoning board can approve anything less than 25%. Otherwise, it is a village board decision. And the height restriction on accessory buildings, I don't have a lot of history on that, but I don't believe it should be too much of an issue. It's certainly not going to affect any sort of daylight plane on neighbors or anything, so, and we're just going to work exactly from the existing footprint of the building. So it'll be minimal disruption of the site, too, when we do this work.
Could I ask you a question? I was thinking about that business of casting shade on anything by going a little bit taller. What is directly to the west of that garage?
The other house next door, on the adjacent property, there is a garden in behind. If we go back to the site plan, actually, I don't think we have, or we go forward like 2 slides. And the west side of the garage on the Clark's property is a garden right there. As far as the adjacent property goes, honestly, I don't recall. They have a detached garage back there, I believe. So, yeah, it's a driveway and detached.
So there's nobody's flowering crab apple or flowering crab tree or anything like that? Okay, their sun deck, any other sun-loving,
And daylight plane, how that works.
No, there's not. It's literally their driveway runs the whole way up our west end to a detached garage.
okay.
In daylight plane, you go to the property line, 12 feet up, then a 45-degree angle. Anything breaking that plane is obviously entering into the daylight plane. So, yeah, you can see there's the garage next door. Their garage door faces north, and it looks like they're probably pretty darn close to their 5-foot setback on the property line there. But as far as casting shadows, there really is going to be minimal impact in that manner. So, but I hope I answered that question.
Are you going to bring that garage forward, which would be further east? Will the new garage be further, I want to say forward towards Maple?
It's going to be on the existing garage as it sits today.
And it's plain.
So all we're doing is taking the roof off. We're actually probably demoing the roof, dropping the floor plate. It's currently a 10-foot ceiling in there now. It'll be going to about a 8'3" ceiling.
Are you going to use the existing foundation? And
Yeah,
existing
everything can
walls?
remain the same.
Okay,
It's,
so essentially you're remodeling the garage, you're not building a new garage.
correct. I mean, the upper half is going to be brand new, and it's
Sure.
going to be altered in a way that makes it compatible to the main building.
Okay.
Also, if you're going to put an office in there, is there going to be HVAC included? And if so, where is that going to go?
HVAC.
Furnace.
Heating and cooling, yes, there will be. We haven't really crossed that bridge yet, but it could be either a small furnace that could be located on the second floor, HVAC system, or we might consider a ductless unit. But that's really something we haven't crossed that bridge yet.
Okay.
Would you heat the garage also?
And it's only, we probably need it when it's used, I suppose.
But for comfort,
So if you don't have heat on the first floor, and then you're trying to work and be on the second floor, you'll need a pretty well insulated floor or.
well, I would
that's-
think, we haven't crossed that bridge yet, but I would think with us, anytime building over a garage, it's nice to have the garage maintaining, 40 degrees, 35 degrees, so that the upstairs isn't ice cold on your feet. But we haven't worked all that out yet. And as far as even where a condenser unit would go, I mean, obviously we'll be conforming to all the codes locally and try to minimize any impact on neighbors.
Is all of this contingent on the new modifications to the ordinance, to our preservation ordinance?
Well, with an HPC designation, I believe it'll certainly benefit the homeowners to move forward with their zoning variance, having that HPC designation. But as I said, we're transparent here, and, you know, our intent is to try to do the second floor addition on the garage with the support of the HPC on that.
In trying to be transparent also, Glenn, can you give us some amplification of, is this application premature to the changes to the ordinance, or are those changes to the ordinance now fully in place, or we're still negotiating, still working with the PCZBA and finance and other parts of the village?
Yeah, so back earlier, really this is about a year-old process at this point, but earlier this year, the village board adopted a modified version of your recommended ordinance, right? So there wasn't consensus on things that would make it more difficult to demolish a house. There wasn't a consensus on things that would make it easier to demolish the house. In effect, many aspects of the ordinance remain status quo, but we, the village board, selected still kept the administrative improvements, still kept the streamlining, still kept a lot of things that make this just more workable. They also accepted and referred some recommendations from this body, really two zoning-based incentives and two financial-based incentives. So on the zoning side, one was saying that landmarks should have an easier time getting variations, essentially. That will be the subject of a hearing held by the PCZBA next month. And so depending on the earliest this application could go through is now at this point in December. And I think with the timing of that, there's, presumably those changes would have to be in place before this application could be heard. And that essentially establishes a presumption, a rebuttable presumption, that a landmark is entitled to whatever variations are requested. And there's still a great deal of latitude there to refuse a variation, but that's there. The second part is a floor area bonus, which I'm sure the PCCBA will work with how that looks. That'll probably be around the first quarter of 23 before it's in place. The other parts, the financial side, you have potentially a increased waiver to building permit fees. Right now that's 25%. This body recommended a full waiver. You also have a local property tax rebate. This body recommended a certain, all village property taxes up to a cap of 2,000 with a varying number of years between existing and future landmarks. The finance committee is considering that. Again, I think they're looking at other alternatives at this time. So at least as far as this application in front of us, there will be some timing as far as the the variation presumption piece of it, which in some sense the PCZBA gives some deference to these types of applications as it is. Whether they can access the other parts really depends on their timing.
Okay, so
The applicants.
I'm very interested in the landmarking process tonight and going through with this tonight. But I don't want to have the clerks in a position where they get ahead of the municipal function, the municipal machinery of grinding through and putting all of the pieces in place. And so if the FAR piece is not put in place, if the presumption of ZBA, how they analyze things has not been put in place yet, I don't have a clue where they're going with the tax rebate piece in the finance department, but if there's some parts that haven't been fully locked in yet, I'm wondering if we agree to landmark this tonight, do we perhaps not want to make the decision until next month or maybe a month further downstream of sending it to the village for review so that the village has time to catch up with what the clerks are doing, what we and the clerks are doing?
So could I ask a question? Would you landmark this independent of your renovation if it?
Well, I think it's We've been hesitant to do it in the past because it didn't really benefit us. Really didn't benefit us. And now that we see a benefit, and also the one thing that I do want to make sure is that nobody tears this building down. We've been there almost 22 years. We've put so much work into it. Want to protect it. And it's sorely missing. No closets, no storage space. It started, the original house was just that. Go back to the beginning. It's crazy.
It was a much smaller house
Yeah. It was
before, and then.
the four square part of it, right?
then
Pretty much.
About 1910, they put the addition on.
11 and 12, one of the
And,
spinster.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you can come to the microphone, sorry. A little more than a comment at this point.
In 1911, one of the spinster sisters got married. The whole house divides into, it's a treasure. The whole house divides into two. There's a big door, had a mutual kitchen. There are two staircases, one with a huge glass window and the other one sort of spirals down. Beautiful paneled living room walls. And a lot of the renovation was done by Crabtree Farm because the previous owners were John Bryan's daughter and son-in-law. So it's beautifully renovated on the interior. And one of the Sherman sisters got married, and the large part, how do I explain this without being in front of it? With the double window down there. So that was a porch. Behind it is a billiard room for the new husband and a master bedroom on the top. And they designed it so there's like Alice in Wonderland walk-through windows where the closets are mirrors that open, and they look like three closets that don't go anywhere, but you open one of the closet doors and you walk over a partition and you're into the other part of the house. It's really fabulous. It's an amazing house.
It's love that.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's really a challenge though, and I'm not kidding. It is a real challenge. My son's closet was the floor was 3 feet tall, so he'd have to jump up into it and then try and get his clothes down.
Yeah.
We
Well,
changed that.
People just simply didn't own as much clothing
No,
as we have
no, they
today.
didn't. But-
Clothing was so much more expensive in relation to people's income that you just didn't own a
No,
lot of clothes.
they didn't have expendable
Yeah, you didn't. and
wardrobes.
So,
But my point is that it needs to be livable for this day and age, and it's still short on
the.
closet
The
space and
changes
storage
we've
space.
proposed to the ordinance are precisely aimed at your house and other houses like this in town. Houses that need to be modernized, houses that need to get a little gimme, a little wiggle here and a little wiggle there. You have a garage that's already over the setback line, and now it's time to expand the garage. So the ordinance changes that we proposed are absolutely aimed right at solving this kind of historical house problem. And-
Otherwise, they won't be able to be saved.
Right,
Otherwise, there
and-
will be
and then-
more
so we-
compelling reasons to tear them down, and
We
that's
end
what
up,
we
we
want.
end up
That's
writing
how
a
we
death
felt
sentence.
about living there. It's like, we'll
Yeah.
do this, we'll do this, we'll do this.
So, I want to make sure that we've got the timing of this right. I mean, I'm very keen.
I hear what you're saying,
I'm
yeah.
very keen on doing that. So what I'm wondering is, should we continue with the hearing this evening and go through with a landmarking discussion that we're going to finish, and then perhaps not make a decision tonight?
Well,
Or perhaps make a decision and then not send it up to the village board?
so if we went
Excellent.
through the landmarking process tonight and approved it, would they necessarily have to take it directly within X amount of time to PCZBA?
What I'm asking our
Or do they can they wait until perhaps PC,
Can
hold the
we-
approval and wait until PCZBA if they
Can we,
approve the
can we make,
variance?
can we make our decision this evening?
Uh-huh.
And then not recommend that we transfer it or we send it over to the village board for 60 days or some period that looks like that?
Well, does it go to village board or does it go to PCZBA
No,
from
it
here?
goes to village board first. It goes to village board first to be landmark.
So, yeah, can I,
Okay.
there's two problem statements, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
One
right.
is whether or not this house is landmarked.
Right.
And then they have a second ask, which is they want to do a renovation of the garage. And they want a variance, which I heard you want 13% and PCVBA can go to 25%.
Correct.
So the question I think you're saying is, can we approve today's landmarking request? And then can they still go to PCCBA, but wait on the formalization of the landmarking so that they benefit from these changes that are in play?
Correct.
No,
Okay.
there's a hiccup in the middle of that.
Because if I'm hearing them, PCCBA could approve what they're asking for right now without any changes.
PCCBA is not, the way the way a zoning application is read now is that their decision-making process is geared directly towards enforcing the ordinance. And so the answer begins at no, and then moves to yes. If the changes to the ordinance are put in place, when it's presented as a landmark is presented to the ZBA, the presumption begins at yes and moves forward. So the problem is,
But-
if they go to ZBA now, the presumption begins at no. And if
Except-
somebody on that board is unhappy with it, it stays at no. If we wait 60 or 90 days and wait for the village machinery to catch up with it, and they adopt this, then they get a much smoother pass at going through ZBA. They don't begin at no, they begin at yes.
Okay.
And so that's the thing, that's the first thing I'm worried about. The second thing I'm worried about is,
But neither of them are guarantees, right? The verbiage is for PCZBA today, they can up to 25%.
you begin at no.
Yeah, I think, Paul's making a good point. I mean, it's, the zoning, PCZBA is there to interpret and enforce the zoning ordinance as written. And what we're talking about here is something I thought was farther through the pipeline, honestly. But in the spirit of trying to save and protect the history of this town, this house being very much one of those buildings, that the Historic Preservation and PCZBA were working together to modify the ordinance for buildings that are historically designated, so that, as stated, it introduces new incentives and changes that will help protect buildings from being torn down. I mean, I had a building that we did last summer, and it needs to be updated, and it's the original campground meeting house.
That's 500 north.
Headquarters.
It's 500
Yeah,
north
and-
that came before us this summer.
And that was, but the buildings is a challenge, and it actually had unique challenges, but we solved it. But the point being that this is all about trying to create incentives to protect buildings, particularly the historic ones.
So, Rob, your
Because
point
when
is,
they don't function to today's standards, people come in and tear them down, and we don't want to lose our history.
you're mentioning 500 north is illustrative of the question that you're raising, in that we, last summer in May?
It was
we-
June.
June, we landmarked 500 North Avenue, and then we did exactly what we're proposing to do this evening, then immediately went into an advisory hearing to review the changes to the building, which we agreed to. The PCZBA just barely passed the changes recommended. There were two very strong no votes on their commission, Then when it got to the village hall, the village trustees for a review, the village trustees initially said no to the ZBA changes. And then Rob went back and made some alterations to the roof line and made some alterations to that process and brought it forth a second time, at which point ZBA said, continued to say yes, and the village board said yes. What I'm trying to avoid is the hiccup that Rob went through, where we thought it was all going to be clear sailing, and someone along the line said, no, I have very strong feelings about this, and I don't want this to go forward in the form that it did.
Yeah, and just real quickly, PCZBA voted 4-2 in favor of that building. It got the village board, and we got a 3-2 favoring. But that was on the first reading. None of us felt very good about that. And that's when we huddled and went through some further revisions. But
So I'm
But this-
trying to avoid that.
Yeah,
But this-
I
That's why
agree.
I'm asking this question now. The second piece is, with regards to the tax issues, the tax rebate issue applies only to the Lake Bluff portion, Lake Bluff Village portion of your tax bill. It doesn't apply to the school part, doesn't apply to the county part. So it only applies to a smaller part of your tax bill. The provisions that are there is to say a new landmark gets its taxes capped at no more than a $2,000 discount for 8 years. It then also says old landmarks only get this $2,000 tax rebate for 1 year. And there's been some rather strong discussion in the last week or so with regards to new landmarks and old landmarks. And I don't want you to get caught, if that goes through, I don't want you to get caught by being an old landmark because you landmark it here in October and they finally agreed to that in January. And I don't want you to be an old landmark if there's a difference between 1 year and 8 years of doing something with your property taxes.
Glenn, can you inform us a little bit more about how historic preservation and PCZBA have been working in parallel here? Or I think there have been some workshops that were done in the past with the two commissions.
Yeah, so, a lot of their, I think a lot of their formal cooperation, this body and the PCZBA, I should mention, I or the person in my role serves as the liaison to both, as well as other village bodies. I think much of the formal cooperation really preceded my tenure here with the village. I mean, I'd say since I've been with the village, landmarks that have sought variations have generally been treated favorably. There haven't been too many instances of that. I mean, I think 500 East North is the first I can think of that was subject to some controversy. That was, a particularly unique instance. I mean, that involved, as was originally submitted, as you know, that involved technically building on someone else's property. You have the right to, an easement, your client did, but, a very unusual case. Is it the exception that proves the rule? I'm not sure.
Well, as a side note, that house was originally located over in East Prospect during the camp meeting ground period. When the campgrounds were disbanded in 1900, that house was converted, or the headquarters was converted into a house, and they relocated it to the North Avenue location. Clearly, they didn't know how to read a plat of survey, and a wing of the house was 2 feet on the adjacent property, which was like, I can't say I've seen something like this before. So that's what made this one rather unique.
I think the horses got tired and pulling the building along, so they just
It was
dropped
late
it
at
there.
night, so they just
Yeah.
dropped it.
It was, but the point being, at least going back to, yes, I do believe the community in general are advocates on protecting architectural significant buildings. as this building. Yeah, I think everyone knows that. Yeah, it's, but I guess, so when it comes to the adopting this revision of the ordinance, I guess it would be, that has still not been formally accepted by the PCCBA at this point?
Yeah, so it was just, it's just I guess you would say a bandwidth issue here at the village. So from the standpoint of, the village's finance committee, they spent most of the summer studying a stormwater utility fee, trying to find ways to fund a very substantial investment into, flooding problems here in the village, which of course is a very pressing issue. Similarly, the Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals was tasked with redoing our planned residential development regulations here in the village. So that was developments like the future, if and when Stonebridge is proposed for a new development, those are the rules that govern that type of development. Those were just adopted. And so it's been waiting to have a chance to examine these issues.
It was on the back burner a little bit here, but it's coming
I
forward.
I think the back burner is more dismissive than it was.
But more
Only so
pressing,
much stuff can get in the oven at one time.
more pressing issues.
Prioritized.
Yeah, more pressing issues were at hand. But, so, well, if you can at least at some point just let us know what that timeline's looking like with the PCCBA's adoption of the recommendation that, HPC had brought to them, that would be helpful as far as a timeline for the homeowners here.
And I can tell you at least the one certain piece, that first part, that presumption aspect, the PCZBA is due to take that up formally next month, and all indications are that they've already had a chance to talk about it. There were no concerns, and they asked us to move forward with a hearing. So I think it's
Okay.
imminent would be the word I would use.
So theoretically, if that moves as planned, that December would be
I believe,
possibly
yeah.
a good time, which is that's the fastest we could move anyway because of the way the calendar is set up, so. Okay,
if
well,
you
that's,
applied tomorrow, you would very likely be working under that presumption.
right, okay. Well, that's helpful. I just didn't realize it was still as fluid as it is right now, so. But getting back to the house, I didn't want to get into too much logistical stuff
Let me
here.
ask
but-
Glenn the question then. Can we landmark this house this evening and not pass this up to the village board yet?
Yeah, so Chair Bergman to talk through a few threads, a few options. So first, the applicant always has the right to withdraw their application up until second reading is passed by the village board. So even if you get a recommendation here, if they get a first reading at the village board, they can still choose to withdraw without prejudice. As far as what you're doing here tonight, perhaps there would be a consensus that you want to landmark it, and you choose to leave the hearing open in case there's any other comments from the public before you act. Once you make your recommendation, once you take the vote, that it's kind of out of this body's hands.
It goes
to the
on
board,
autopilot.
progresses on, yeah. I will note, so you are on a bit of a shot clock, let's say. So you need to take some type of action within 90 days from today, or it's an automatic recommendation to deny it to the village board. Similarly, once it gets to the village board, they need to act on it in 90 days, or it's an automatic denial. And I certainly hope it doesn't come to this, but I would note that if you are unable to assemble a quorum for some reason during the holidays, that could inadvertently result in that recommendation for a denial. So I would just be very, very careful with that.
Okay. All right.
Is there a scenario where we could approve a recommendation today for landmarking? And then if for some reason there's a delay or whatever, they could ask that the review at the village board would be tabled to the next month?
They could certainly ask for that, and they could choose to withdraw their application if that request wasn't granted yet. I mean, it's a no fee application. Worst case, you withdraw and you Not that I
And
want
you
to,
submit it
not that we
like
want
a
to do
month
this
later?
again, but
Yeah.
So then that would
a lot of
place,
flexibility.
that would place, and rather than having us delay it, we
Right.
could go through with our business this evening, and then it would be on the clerks to monitor the timing of when that gets fully brought in front of the village, in front of the village trustees.
Yeah, and we, we would keep them apprised. Certainly, when this goes to the village board, we can share some of the flavor. Usually when I say we'll share the flavor of a discussion, it refers to the subject of the application, but to the extent that there's uncertainty around not having some of these incentives in place, we can convey that also.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
Okay.
Okay, good. Well, then we can continue with our hearing and then, and see if we're going to landmark the property or not tonight, and then see if we're going to go through with the second part of this, the advisory hearing, and then the clerks can monitor the navigating that up to the village board.
If we withdraw, can we reapply then?
Yeah, that if you were to withdraw, I'm saying it's your question from the microphone, but you can reapply without prejudice. So you just come back here and start over with a presentation. I'm sure that'll be very similar to tonight.
Which you could also just, at least initially, ask to have the topic tabled to the next meeting.
You certainly could, yes.
Great, okay, good. So, getting back to the house at hand here, Mr. Douglas, do you have any other comments about the house? Is there anybody else here who has comments about the house? I think we're ready to have some discussions. What?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll just note, typically we will leave a chance for members of the public to comment. There's no other persons here at Village Hall and none participating online.
Good, okay. So then we can open this up to discussion. Jeannie, Lois, Margaret, thoughts?
Well, several thoughts, all positive. I think that, well, I applaud how you have maintained the integrity of the home, and you've worked so hard to keep it as it was on the facade and the outside. I know you've had to do a lot of work to make it livable, which is very understandable. I really like, too, that when you start thinking about other needs that you have, like office space, which is certainly what people are all needing right now, that you're looking at other options than changing the integrity of the home. You're looking to the garage and putting it on top of the garage, and I think that was a very creative use of that space. And then I just love the way the garage reflects the character of the home, with the horizontal roof. And looking at it from the south elevation and then from the east also, it's very attractive and it looks great. And I'm happy that you found a way to use that space and that it will be meeting your needs in the future. So I think it's a great design and will be a great use of that space. And I just love how it reflects the home. It's really lovely. So thank you for everything that you've done, and for the book on Tomlinson. That was incredible. It was a fascinating reading. Thank you very much for all the work.
She has given us a number of copies of it this evening, so you all are going to.
Lovely.
You have a gift coming at some point. I shouldn't say that in the middle of the hearing. Looks like we're trying to load the,
It's free on the website.
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Read it, anybody can read it.
Margaret, any thoughts?
Yeah, I echo what you said, and I like that the way that you've addressed it is not impacting your neighbors, so you're sticking to the footprint that is there and just elevating it. So I think when we're asking for variances, I think it's important to think about our neighbors and all of that. So thank you for that. I love that you took something that wasn't integral to the original home, and now you're restoring that space
Yeah.
to something that looks like it would have been, so.
Yeah, it looks like it was built alongside the home.
For the horse and buggy.
And keep all the harnesses up on the second floor.
Jamie,
Yeah,
what are
okay. Well,
your
I
thoughts?
would agree with what both of you said. I think it's a lovely home. I'm thrilled that you're seeking the land market because I too want to save the older homes in town, and I don't see any negatives at all. I think that you have done a wonderful job of making changes to make it match the, like you said, the integrity of the original home. It's going to be a beautiful side piece to the front, the east facade of the house. Yet you could have asked to go much higher, and the height is really the minimum that you could do and still have headspace. And so you're clearly taking into account all of the issues. I don't see any issues to raise at all. I'm thrilled that you're going to do both landmark and this change to make it more livable.
Great. My comments are, I'll make my comments very short. I have always sort of actively disliked your current garage because it's so far out of the realm, not only is it out of the realm of your property, but it's sort of out of the realm of the neighborhood. And it looks like the kind of garage that you buy out of a catalog, whether you buy it at Menards or Sears or something like that, but you pay a very small amount of money and someone comes and plops that down in your yard. So I'm pleased as punch is what you're going to do with this. At this point, do we think we're ready to take a vote on this? Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could, the commission may wish to discuss those specific reasons for landmarking that were identified in
Yes,
the
I'm forgetting
application
I'm forgetting my
and shown
rules
in the
here.
ordinance.
Yes, indeed. So,
So as you're turning, so a bit of context. One, this is an old copy of the village's landmark nomination. We'll come back to that topic in staff report. So a couple of these no longer apply or are written slightly differently. The draft ordinance you have uses the current language, and we just accept the application as it is in drafting that for you. We don't give a staff recommendation one way or another on which of those to take or not to take. You can see certainly some of those criteria have information associated with them that we can draw from the application. Others, there's not a direct support for them or direct citations we can look to in drafting it from the application. So,
okay. So I'm going to begin here at the landmark general conditions.
I would, a better list maybe if you turn to the draft ordinance on the first page, starting at the subhead, general considerations here.
Okay. Now I've gotten it together here.
In the PDF, that'll be page 12.
Thank you.
And wait, I'll even, we'll put it up on the screen for you. For everyone, I should say.
That's the same thing, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, starting with general considerations. The feature has significant character, interest, or value as part of the historic, aesthetic, cultural, or architectural characteristics of the village, state of Illinois, or United States.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
we say yes? Mr. Tomlinson, yes. Number two, the feature is closely identified with a person or persons who significantly contributed to the development of the village, the state, or the United States. So number two, we say yes?
Yes.
Okay, number three, the feature involves the notable efforts of or is the only known example of work by a master builder, designer, architect, architectural firm, or artist whose individual accomplishments have influenced the development of the village, the state, or the United States. So we could say yes. Item four, the unique location or singular physical characteristics of a feature make it an established or familiar visual feature. Let's say yes.
Oh, yeah.
The activities associated with the feature make it a current or former focal point of reference in the village. We say yes, no. Discussion?
Activities. I don't know if there's anything significant historically, other than the fact that the architect is significant. Are
Well,
you
that
aware of?
goes to the social history of the property and the, what is the name of the sisters that were in the house?
Yeah, the Sherman sisters and.
Is it necessary?
No. Historical,
Yes.
Well, it could be either, really.
yes.
I went up to Waukegan to look at the land titles, and the man who married the Shermans, they owned all the property in Lake Bluff. They owned parcel after parcel after parcel, and you got to see that it was like same names over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think it is, and they performed at the hotel that was over on Prospect.
Oh, the
Hotel
Hotel Irving?
Sorry?
The Hotel Irving?
I hate to interrupt, but again, if you could speak at the podium. I'm sorry.
You're being taped as well as
The
on
Sherman
television.
sisters performed at the Hotel Irving quite a bit, and they were also downtown at another, they performed downtown. And Webster Tomlinson, I mean, his background, he started with Louis Sullivan, and
Okay, so.
I'm
what
good
do-
with the
So
yes.
are we, so we're
think
we're
we
pretty
can
much in
call that a
agreement on that?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So then, item 6, the features, a type or associated with the use common but now rare or particularly fine or unique example of a utilitarian feature and possesses a high level of integrity or architectural significance. I
Absolutely.
think we get the yes quickly there. Item 7, the feature has yielded or is likely to yield historically significant information or even prehistoric data. And so, given the fact that we have a book here written about the architect, I think we can say yes to that. Getting now into the second section, we have architectural significance. This is item 8. The feature represents certain distinguishing characteristics of architecture inherently valuable for the study of a time period, type of property, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials. I think we get yes. Item 9, the feature embodies elements of detail, of design, detail, material, or craftsmanship of exceptional quality.
Yes.
Having seen the pictures of the floors in your house, I'm quite interested to see your interior. The feature exemplifies, item 10, the feature exemplifies a particular architectural style in terms of detail, material, workmanship, which has resulted in little or no alteration to its original construction.
It's a big yes.
Get the yes. Item 11, the feature is one of the few remaining examples of a particular architectural style and has undergone little or no alteration since its original construction. We get the yes. Item 12, the feature is or is a part of a contiguous grouping that has a sense of cohesiveness expressed through the similarity of style, characteristics, time period, type of property, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials and accents the architectural significance of the area.
That
So-
would be the only one so far that I would question, because there's not really a grouping.
no, it's the prairie style.
Yeah.
So it's a very,
So-
very nice example of prairie style home.
Exactly, but it's not in a grouping of prairie style.
Oh, in this area?
Well,
Yeah, he did another one that's on Prospect.
Right.
there's Jungle Nook over on Prospect.
Dr. Ward's
Oh.
house was also,
Unfortunately, that
It's
disappeared.
gone.
yeah.
So we have similarities of style, we have a time period. So we can either say yes or no to this. We have plenty of other yeses.
Yeah, we don't have to say yes to all of them.
Okay. We can mark that down. Okay, item 13. The detail, material, and workmanship of the feature can be valued in and of themselves as reflective of or similar to those of the majority of the other visual elements in the area. So this addresses your question, does it look like the rest of the prairie-style houses in town? And so we get the yes.
Yes.
We get to the third section, historic significance. The feature is an exceptional example of in historic or vernacular style, or is one of the few of such remaining properties of its kind in the village. And I think that's a yes. Item 15, the feature has a strong association with the life or activities of a person or persons who significantly contributed to or participated in the historic or cultural events of the United States, the state of Illinois, or the village.
Yes.
I think that takes it. Item 16, the feature is associated with an organization or group, whether formal or informal, from which persons have significantly contributed to or participated in the historic or cultural events of the United States, the state of Illinois, or the village. I think that gets to yes.
Yes.
The feature, item 7.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I would just ask the commission which group that is. I think we'd like to note that there. If that's just the office of the Tomlinsons, we can, of Mr. Tomlinson, Mr. Wright, we can do that, or I'm not sure if people
Well, I
have
would
something
say
else.
that, and the fact that they performed at the Hotel Irving would mean that they're, the sisters, the Sherman sisters, and the fact that, did you say it was their father who owned a lot of
The husband.
parcel, or one of,
The husband of
one of the sisters who owned lots of
and the
property?
sisters themselves and Tomlinson.
Yes.
But if you go up there and look at around the turn of the century, Bluff was owned by a small handful of people.
Yeah. So the other significant group or organization, I think someone just mentioned, there's an architectural group of Prairie architects called the 18, or the Club of 18.
Yeah, that was
They have
interesting.
some books written about the fact that Tomlinson, Wright, a whole handful of the Prairie architects, Howard Van Doren Shaw from Lake Forest, and other architects met in this luncheon group out of the Steinway Building in Chicago. So there is a very significant architectural group there also. Okay, item 17. 17, the feature is associated with an antiquated use due to technological or social advances. And since the horses aren't in the barn anymore,
I wouldn't be able to get that, could I? I would let a horse.
so I don't know, what do we think about this?
How about a chicken?
You can do that.
You can do chickens.
So are you planning on chickens? So what do we think? Is that a yes or a no?
And if you're inclined to,
Well,
yes.
if you consider lack of an office to be antiquated.
You
Maybe
had
so.
checked that, what, as one of the contributing factors. So,
I spoke about it, just the lack of storage and the lack of,
okay.
the bedrooms are very small.
Okay.
It's just not up to today's standards at all. It's not built for this century.
Yeah. Mhm. Right. So, yes?
Gas
Okay.
lamps when we renovated the bedroom.
Really?
Lights are still there, yeah.
So we think yes? We're okay with that? Okay. So on our 17-point scorecard, we've rated this house very high,
Very high.
okay? Glenn, do we now vote on the property altogether?
Yes, and I would recommend you do so just in the form of, so on the staff memorandum on page 2, I would suggest you follow the approval of modifications action, and then direct us to add additional references to the Sherman sisters and the work of Mr. Tomlinson and the Club of 18 and the criteria in the ordinance.
So can you all find this page? This is the second page of the memorandum? Okay. So I will ask for some discussion and one of these example motions.
Or you can make up your own if you like. Those are
Okay.
simply there to help you.
Do we want to add to one of these motions?
I move that
Yeah.
we recommend to the village board to designate as landmark the single-family residence of 618 Maple, Avenue for the reasons set forth in the application, with the addition to highlight the sisters.
Yeah, the Sherman
Sherman
sisters, the work of, again, more references to the work of Mr. Tomlinson and the Club of 18. And I suppose you would strike that section C5, which is the contiguous grouping. You would put that in your motion also.
Okay. What he said.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Thank you. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Okay. Are we ready to take a vote? Okay, so a roll call vote?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. Member George?
Aye.
Member Nickel?
Aye.
Member Minor?
Aye.
Chair Kraus? Or excuse me, Bergman. Oh, my goodness. I'm having flashbacks.
Aye. Do I get to vote twice? I'll say aye.
You're blending in all right.
So, I think we have a landmark.
Great. Congratulations.
So, wonderful.
That's exciting.
So we've gotten the first piece of business done. Now, we immediately segue into part 2 of this. Now that we have a landmark, we now have a plan in front of us to modify the building we've just landmarked. So we get to have an advisory hearing or an advisory review on altering the landmark. And so we landmark the property, now we get to go and have an advisory review process. We have a different set of standards that we're gonna review this by. I'm gonna ask Rob to very quickly just go right over the tops of the changes that you're looking at. Show us the roof line again, show us the sections, and that's all I want you to do.
Well, I think as one of the commissioners mentioned, the integrity of the main house is being maintained and is untouched. What we are doing is adding office space that is needed for the homeowners by creating a second floor over the existing garage, which is a very utilitarian garage. And this addition will allow the opportunity to create a gable end similar to the main house, so that the garage really reflects the main house in a secondary fashion, allow the main house to be the primary. And with this modification, we're able to get that home office that the homeowners are looking for. We will be seeking with at an appropriate time with the PCZBA a bulk variance and a height variance.
Okay, great. So, we have some changes to the property. Do we think that these are changes that are altering the property in such a way that we are diminishing the historic nature of the landmark that we've just landmarked?
No,
No.
Okay?
As a matter of fact, I believe we're enhancing it.
I agree.
So, I'm trying to find we have general standards for review for this?
Yeah, and I can put those up on the screen.
Okay. And I want to go through them just real quickly.
Let me try to get these sized up a little bit. There you go.
Okay. So these are the standards that we use when we are going through the review process of alterations to a landmark. They're slightly different than what we did when we actually landmarked the building. And I want to go through these real quickly because they are different. We all seem to be very happy with the garage that's coming here, but I want to make sure that we see these and just quickly go through them. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time with them this evening, but the general standards are any work should promote the purpose and goals of the chapter and the general welfare of the village and the residents. That seems fairly standard. Alterations that do not affect any essential architectural or historic characteristics of a feature as viewed from any adjacent or public or private street should be permitted. The construction of new structures and alterations to landscapes should not be discouraged when such construction or alteration does not destroy significant historical, architectural, or cultural characteristics and is compatible with the size, scale, color, material, and character of the existing features in the neighborhood or the environment. This item 3 is something that we've already discussed this evening about how happy we are that we're not invading the sunlight plane. It's compatible with the house, it's compatible with the neighborhood. And at some point in the future, we may be confronted with some alteration that does seem to infringe on this. And then item 4, if possible, the construction of new structures and buildings and alterations should be undertaken in such a manner that such construction or alteration were to be removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the original feature would be unimpaired. Well, if the garage disappears, the main house will remain, and so that doesn't become a problem. Distinguishing original, item 5, the original qualities or character of a feature and its environment should not be destroyed. No modification or demolition of any material, historic, or distinctive architectural element should be permitted except where necessary to assure an economically viable use of the site. And so we're not destroying anything on the property. We'll get into this if we're going to add a wing onto a house. This is adding the glass box onto a brick house kind of question. So that doesn't apply. And item 6, demolition should not be undertaken if a feature is economically viable in its present condition. And so this is the demolition by neglect question that comes up. It doesn't apply here. Getting into the rehabilitation guidelines, these guidelines come from the National Historic Register. They're part of the National Park Service guidelines, and they apply all across the country, almost in this exact form. So, number 1, reasonable efforts should be made to use a feature for its originally intended purpose or to provide a compatible use that requires minimal modification of a feature and its environment. And I think adding an apartment or a workspace above the garage, I think adds to this, and it's a minimal modification to the garage, not to the house, but I think this works here. Item 2, all features should be recognized as products of their own time. Modifications that have no historic basis and seek to create an earlier appearance than the true age of the property are discouraged. So we're not engaging in any form of historicism here. We're just simply mimicking, as Mr. Douglas said, we're creating a little brother to the house. So I think that works. Item 3, changes that may have taken place over time evidence the history and development of a feature and its environment. These changes may have acquired significance in their own right, and this significance should be recognized and respected when dealing with a specific architectural period. This would apply to what Mrs. Clark told us about the additions to the house in 1910 when the billiard room was added. Item 4, distinctive stylistic elements or examples of skilled craftsmanship that characterize a feature should be maintained and preserved if possible. Here, Rob is mimicking some of the features on the main house. Item 5, deteriorated structural elements should be repaired. That doesn't seem to apply here. We don't have to repair or replace any sort of missing architectural elements. If you could pan down a little further. And we're not doing any surface cleaning. We are not sandblasting the bricks, which is always to be avoided. And then the last section of this is the architectural design guidelines. The height of a feature after alteration should be compatible with the height of the original feature. So we are right there with that. The relationship between a feature and adjacent open spaces after its alteration should be compatible with such a relationship prior to the alteration. We discussed that earlier when we talked about the sunlight plane and people's backyards. The relationship among the height, width, and scale of a feature after alteration should be compatible with such relationship prior to the alteration. The garage doesn't overshadow the house. The garage isn't larger than the house. It isn't the tail wagging the dog. The directional expression of a feature or alteration, whether it's vertical or horizontal positioning, should be compatible with the directional expression of the feature. Again, the fenestration on the garage is highly similar to the house, so we don't have vertical paneling competing with and arguing with horizontal paneling. The roof shape of the feature after the alteration should be compatible with the roof shape of the original feature. Rob has done a nice job of mimicking the roof planes. The architectural details, design materials, textures, and colors of a feature after alteration should be compatible with the original. That's certainly the case here. The appurtenances, including without limitation, signs, fences, landscaping of a feature should be compatible with the original feature. I think your property has gate posts in the front yard? So I don't know if you're putting pillars at the end of your driveway or not, but that would be a compatible appurtenance. And so I don't know if that's necessarily applicable. But I wanted to go through all of these features here so that we understand that what they've presented here in this hearing is different than what was presented in the application for landmarking. This is a different set of rules that we have, and we need to understand that there are two sets of rules and take a quick look tonight as to how those rules apply. And having done that, I will ask the group, are there any questions or thoughts or any ideas that we need to explore with regards to the alterations to this new landmark?
Not at all, not for me.
Okay. So having gone through all of the features, are we at a point to find our next sheet like this and ask for a motion?
I believe so.
Okay.
Can I just ask a point of question? So we've made a recommendation to the village to landmark the home, so that technically they're not under these guidelines yet. Is it premature to do this piece, or can we do the same thing?
Yeah, so as soon as the application for landmarking is filed, while that's still pending, it's treated as a landmark. So many ordinances say that you just can't do anything during this period. Ours still allows you to conduct this review and end it.
Got it.
In order to allow things to go faster.
And so that cuts off a whole cycle, a whole review cycle, the timing of a whole review cycle. Okay. So we have a handful of proposed motions here. And I would ask that, are there any questions about the proposed motions? And would someone like to volunteer one of those?
Is this?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, I will do so. I move that the commission terminate the advisory review as the proposed work is not inconsistent with the criteria for changes to protected features.
Second.
And Margaret has seconded. Is there any discussion about, do we want to add anything to this motion? Are there any additions we want to make to the motion?
I think so.
Okay. And so are we ready for a roll call vote?
Certainly. Member Church,
Aye.
Member Minor,
Aye.
Member Nickel,
Aye.
Chair Bergman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. Okay. So thank you very much for bringing this forward. We love the fact that you're going to landmark the house. We love the fact that you're going to make some very nice changes to it. Any other comments?
Thank
Okay.
you for all your work and preparation for this.
Yeah,
We'll just be in touch with Mr. Cole
on the timing.
path moving forward.
Great.
So typically, this would go to the village board for first reading on a Monday, November 14th. Again, we'll discuss the timing of that based on your discussion, your discussions as an architect and a client, and we'll go from there.
And the PCZBA is on November.
The next PCZBA meeting is on November 16th, so you're certainly welcome to participate in that hearing. Something we'll talk about during the staff report, as well as scheduling for a joint workshop between this body and that body, either in November or perhaps January, depending on this group's availability.
Okay. Well, we'll be talking.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Vanessa, Rob, this is wonderful. I can't tell you how happy we are. Okay?
You're welcome to leave if you like. We have a couple more items on our agenda.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the gift of the booklets also.
Yes.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun, actually, to do.
Good night.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving forward, we now get to 231 Prospect and landmark status, and the letter that has come from the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy. And so the History Museum received a letter from the Conservancy about their analysis of what's called the Vanderkloot McElwain House, which is what we have always thought to be our Frank Lloyd Wright house or our Frank Lloyd Wright wannabe house. Never completely convinced as to which. They have written a letter saying that they think that it is not a C3 of the American Systems built homes. I think the letter raises a number of issues. For one thing, the letter is very good in analyzing the house and comparing it to the American-built systems houses. So I think that's very interesting. I'm going to ask for all of your comments and thoughts about this, and what you think about the letter and some of the issues that are raised in the letter. And then ultimately, we're going to discuss what to do with this. So it seems to conflict with the landmark status that we awarded it several years ago. So does anybody have any comments about the letter?
Well, I was really interested to read it because I was always under the impression that it was one of his system-built houses. And when you see that comparison side to side, it's clear that there are some very major differences. What that made me think is, why couldn't you be inspired by a system-built house and build something different? But that would sort of negate the whole concept of a system-built house. Mm-hmm. So there's the conundrum for me. And did I read that correctly in concluding that no one has been able to conclusively attribute that house to Wright?
Correct, yeah. Well, Yeah, I was very surprised too when I read the letter, because I've always known that as the one Frank Lloyd Wright house in town. But then as I was reading the letter and the comparisons and differences between the American-built system house and 231, there clearly are some very strong similarities that would lead one to wonder whether the kit was ordered and then Vanderklut modified it, because most of the modifications are internal. The whole cladding is what was sold with those kits. And I think it said right at the beginning of the information that Frank Lloyd Wright designed these homes, but then he turned it over to a developer to put them into place, and really didn't oversee it at all, and in fact found out that the developer was like letting all kinds of changes happen, so then he terminated their relationship. So I guess that just opens up a whole lot of questions about the relationship of that home to Frank Lloyd Wright's American system-built houses. And then, and you know, certainly the basis for landmarking this house would have changed if it was clearly done because of Frank Lloyd Wright. But if we look at other reasons for landmarking, I think we're certainly open to lots of discussion about that.
Is it already landmarked? And that's what I thought, and
Yes.
we're discussing whether to,
Decertify it.
yes.
Yeah,
So,
or change the reasons
we-
for the
yeah,
landmark.
we landmarked it as being a Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Yes.
And so now when the Conservancy comes and says, we are pretty certain that it's not, then we need to go back and look at the landmark, the language of the landmarking that we
Right,
have.
right.
And so
Okay.
there's a couple of different things we can do. So, Margaret, do you have any thoughts?
So just to clarify, the Conservancy is the one initiating this, not the homeowners. Is that a true statement?
That's correct.
Okay, so that the homeowners aren't asking that it be rescinded?
No.
So perhaps to put this more precisely, so the Conservancy hasn't initiated anything. They sent that to the History Museum. We only just came into possession of it. We didn't know about it before this. There's, again, plenty of rumor isn't quite the right word, but, you know, there was talk about this without us getting a copy, I guess I would say.
Okay.
So we as staff are bringing this to your attention. The original landmark nomination wasn't by the owners, it was by the History Museum. I mean, that's something to consider given changing viewpoints on that topic in town. So now that, you know, if this was to happen again, the museum can serve as a nominating party. Whether rescinding or adding this, you know, if it was rescinded, would that have the owner's consent? I'm not sure. If it wasn't a landmark and you were to landmark it today, would that have the owner's consent? I'm not sure. And those are conversations we haven't had. But we just know that there's a disconnect now between the basis of this designation as it happened at the time and the information we have today. So that's why we're bringing it to your attention.
So the Conservancy really sent that letter as sharing information, or?
I think it may have been requested by the History Museum. I'm really not terribly sure, honestly. It's addressed to the History Museum.
Are you aware of anybody
No.
requesting it? I'm not either.
And I don't know if Kathy O'Hara might have been talking to them. I literally don't know the genesis of the letter.
We can certainly find out.
Yeah. So, I think we need to take the letter into consideration and add it to the packet. In reading the letter, I see that they say there was a great falling out, as you pointed out, there was a great falling out between the developer and Wright. That Wright didn't have a lot of input, after he made the designs, he didn't have a lot of input into the building process or the sales process. The other thing is, they say that there's very few records that are available from the whole American Building Systems thing, so I think it's still, one of you mentioned that they may have started out with the kit, and then the carpenter and the Vanderkloots, improved the drawings or something like that. If Mr. Wright wasn't on site, or the developer wasn't on site to enforce that, they may have actually started out with the plans. So one of the things the letter points out is whether or not this might be a pirated C3 house, in that Vanderkloot got a copy of the drawings from somebody else and is trying to build his own facsimile of it. So I think there's a whole bunch of questions that are still floating around with regards to this.
Gives a whole new meaning to porch pirates. Can't help myself.
Have you been saving that?
No, I haven't. That was,
I love it. I love it. So Glenn, what do you think we should do at this point?
yeah, so we're really just looking for direction as staff. I mean, there's a few choices you can take. One is you can do nothing. Again, I won't belabor it, but we've spoken with the village attorney, and that's that's a defensible position. The second is we can look to change this landmark designation. We may need to put in a procedure to do that. There's a procedure to revoke it, but not necessarily to tweak it. And so you may find, without even getting into the Pandora's box of what are the true origins of this house, you may be able to say that it's reflective of the prairie style of architecture, and it has the associations with Vanderkloot.
Yes.
And it's a visible, it's a focal point of the village, visually and so on, and you may be able to get there regardless of how you answer these origin questions. The third is simply to say that this, you don't believe it meets the criteria for landmarking anymore, and we can start the process to, rescind that designation completely. I'll note here again the owner's consent or lack thereof. Then now, unsure how that would look. They haven't requested for this to be removed, but again, not clear from the record that they, were willing at the time it happened.
They've been pretty compliant with the landmarking, if I recall.
Yeah.
They have been fully aware, they were fully aware of the landmarking process at that time and had no objections, so.
And it should be said too, that as I understand it, I haven't been in there or really seen it, aside from walking by it a few times, but I'm told it's in disrepair.
It's been for years.
Yeah, this letter existing probably hurts its odds of being rehabilitated in the future, and so to some extent you're considering, you're weighing there's other consequences
Well,
here.
that was another thought that I had when I saw this letter, was that this was maybe a precursor to losing it.
Certainly many Frank Lloyd Wright homes that are even authenticated are being demolished.
In trouble,
Exactly
yeah.
right.
So, any thoughts about, I think I heard, do nothing, do some more research, or do some form of decertification, recertification? What?
More precisely, I'd say do nothing, change it to some set of criteria that's really agnostic as to whether or not it's a Frank Lloyd Wright house or revoke. Do more research is another option. That really kind of, what other research we can do is the question there.
Yeah.
We don't have the resources of the Conservancy to really throw
Well,
in
I'm
this.
wondering if we could write a letter back to the Conservancy asking them to clarify some of the things in their letter. I don't know if we need to do that, or even if we should do that at this point, but,
I would like to clarify how that letter even came to the History Museum and why, and
okay.
that
Well,
would
we
be
can-
my first question.
We can resolve that without going back to the Conservancy.
Exactly.
So,
And then the second question I would have is, if you remove the Frank Lloyd Wright, would the house merit landmarking independent of that?
See, I feel that it still would, just by being, I did not realize until this came through that this was another one of the Vanderklut properties.
Yeah. Again, as
Yeah.
Ms. Clark pointed out, there's a handful of people that own most of the village, and the Vanderkluts were part of that very early group.
And if we look at the homes that are currently landmarked, I'm not certain how many of them have architects, renowned architects.
Yeah, we've landmarked a lot of houses with pedigrees that are
Exactly,
far less documented than Frank Lloyd Wright.
right, because they fit the vernacular of the homes being built in that era, or they're reflective of
But
some
mo-
other.
Many of the camp meeting houses were just simply carpenter-built houses.
That's right.
Right.
So, okay. At this
And there's-
point, do we do nothing? Do we want to go back and find out what's going on at the History Museum?
Yes, I would like to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe table this discussion until we,
Come back next month,
yeah.
I agree.
something like that. See if we can find out a little bit more about how this came together. Does that seem okay?
Yes.
Because if there's no clear, substantial evidence that Frank Lloyd Wright was the architect of record, then we really wouldn't want to keep that on the ordinance, right?
Well,
Oh,
it's-
you mean on the
Marking.
Landmarking,
certification
yeah.
for the landmark status? Yeah, I would think that,
That would-
in all
Give it-
fairness to our integrity here,
Right, no, yeah,
in all honesty, we would need to change that if that's the case. But like I said, I think we need to do a little more research before we make that move.
Given Wright's distance from the American system-built houses,
yeah.
I don't think you need to have his thumbprint in the paint on the wall. You know?
Could it not be an example of
Yeah,
it?
it could be,
Yeah,
you
the
know.
prairie,
a-
yeah.
So, all right. So why don't we, would you like to table this?
Yes.
And we'll go see what's going on at the museum and whatnot? Okay.
I move that we table this.
I
Do
second.
we need to take a vote on this?
You can if you like to, if that's your consensus, that's fine too.
I think it's fine to just say,
If we
let's
can-
table it.
Yeah, okay, great. I think it's important for us to know that this is here, and that we're gonna be adding this to the file on the house. And I don't know that we need to make any changes to the status of the house just yet. Maybe if the house goes on the market, we're gonna be forced into doing that, or something like that, but that doesn't seem to be imminent, so,
Well, you never know.
yeah.
I mean, if we're going to do some sort of action, probably sooner rather than later would be to
Maybe
our
so.
advantage. but-
Maybe so, okay.
It does have a new roof, right? It's kind of
Well,
hold it for a little while.
new is a
hold it to
relative term.
Glue it together.
About the time we landmarked it, somebody came up with some money to very carefully fix the roof or replace the roof or something, and fix up the soffits and things like that on the house.
It was a
So,
local builder who donated.
yeah,
Right.
there were a bunch of donations involved, I think.
Were there?
Yeah. So, some cash here and some labor there and things like that, so, okay. Commissioner report, is that me? Is that? you?
That's the group. I know, I believe you wanted to have this document here under your report, so we have copies here at the dais for.
Okay, so we'll get to that in a second here. So, this is my first meeting, and so I have to apologize for being a little ham-handed, a little clumsy about doing this, but I want to thank all of you for being part of the HPC Commission. We do a lot of important, when we have work to do, it's important work and stuff. I want to emphasize that I wanted to run through the standards. I was going to go through the standards that we have in this part of the meeting, but once the 618 Maple House came up, I realized we were going to go through both sets of standards. So we went through something that I wanted to sort of emphasize to our group, is that I want us to be a standards-based group where we're making decisions based on sort of the rules of the road that we have in front of us. That allows us to make clearer decisions and it allows us to clarify our own thinking, and also allows the people of the village, people who are bringing things to us, to know that we're not being just arbitrary and saying, I like this, I don't like that, which means we're taste-making rather than going through sort of a review process. So I want to thank you for going through that second piece of it. I know some of you were a little surprised at the length of that, but that's important for us to have as part of our muscle mass on how we do things.
Well, while we're on the subject, I'd like to thank you for stepping into the pilot's seat here.
Yeah.
I was not anticipating that at all, but nor was I ever anticipating being the head of the commission. It's always been nice being the crow sitting over on the side.
You're where you need to be right now.
Yeah. So one of my traditions is to always make sure that people on the board have a copy of McAllister. And I buy these at the house sale. They're used, they're only a couple of bucks. I've given one to you. You say you have one.
I
I've
have
given
one
one to you. You have one. So I now have some extras. We have 2 empty seats, so I have 2 homes waiting for this. While we're giving, well, it's Christmas time here. I have a couple of other things to give away. And the last time we met, I gave to you an architectural dictionary.
Yes, you did.
Okay. That's called the Cyril Harris Dictionary. That book has been published several times in several different formats, and so you have a copy, I have a copy. Did I give you a copy of the Cyril Harris?
What was the cover look like? Forgive me, I'm not sure I would know the
So,
author.
It's a dictionary of all of the parts and
I
pieces.
believe we have a copy.
Okay,
yes.
so I have 2 copies, they're different, and I think I have these for both of you. So whoever grabs one fastest gets the hardcover, and the other one gets the soft cover.
Doesn't matter. Take your pick. I'll leave them here.
What's nice is, if we're going through the process and actually looking at a house and trying to figure out the cross-hatching, or figuring out, in the 618 Moffett House, figuring out the overhanging eaves or something like that, you might be reaching for a phrase or a word or something like that. There's at least some source that you have gathering dust somewhere in your bookcase with that.
The fact of the matter is, Paul, with you around, we don't need these reference materials. But
We all turn toward the center.
It's always fine to have references.
no, it
And
is, it is. I enjoy looking through them.
So I use this regularly. So I have a third one called Traditional Construction Patterns. And so if anybody would like to raise their hand, I have a third one as a gift this evening. So you haven't gotten a present.
Thank you.
So that's just so that everybody has a certain amount of just reference work close to hand. And so we have things that we can refer to. The last thing that I have, this is called Riggins Rules. It's a little handout I got. This is written by a guy who was head of a preservation commission for like 20 or 25 years. I think he was in Ohio, I think is where he comes from. And it's just a neat list of do's and don'ts about how to sit on a board. And little things about, number 1, don't accept an appointment or a nomination to a board unless you expect to spend 99% of your time of the regular and special meetings, including inspection trips and blah, blah, blah. If your participation falls below 85%, you ought to consider, whether you have the time and effort to be on the board. This is just sort of rules of the road and stuff like that. Just kind of a fun thing to read. This is sort of a read and toss kind of thing. Read it, enjoy it, and whatnot. And so that's sort of what I have. We have some other projects that are out there on the horizon, some of which are going to be interesting and maybe contentious. So I want everybody to be feeling comfortable about being on the board, and I want everybody to be looking forward to what we're going to be doing, and I think in the very near
Is it possible
future.
to share any skimpy details?
About what would be contentious?
Yeah, I was not aware of anything looming, but
The demolition?
Possibly, some possible demolitions out there and whatnot. So there's some properties that are going on the market. I don't want to say anything until applications have been put forward. But sometimes you hear chatter here and chatter there. And anytime a property with a great big lot, a great big piece of land is going on the market, the question comes up of whether it's going to be coming in front of us. So there's those kinds of things there.
Okay.
So I want to thank you for all of that, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Yes, so staff reports tonight, we have 3 items for you. The first was just an addition to your agenda, which is the 1 Moffett Road demolition application. So this is, of course, a significant, has been identified as a significant property in the village, one of the village's historic estates, and again, there's information about that in the demolition application you've received prior to this meeting. We have not set it up for you to start that review tonight. The applicants can be present with us. That review is set to start on November 9th, and again, important that we have attendance and can conduct that review. We also have, you'll see in the morning, a list of dates potentially for members of the commission to visit the property and tour it. So we've worked with the applicants, their professional help, and the village attorney to make a way to, again, see that. One of these meetings, if they're convened and we choose to attend, will be on tape for the hearing if needed, if there is a hearing and so on. But we'll give you some availability for that, and certainly encourage you to, if you would like to view the property, to take a look around inside of it. You'll have that opportunity to do so. We appreciate the applicants, the Aherns in this case, making that available to help your deliberations. So again, the November 9th will be the application. There's a 90-day clock that started when this application was submitted. At the November hearing, you'll have a number of questions to consider, including if you'd like the village board to extend that period of time, and potentially if you would like to consider whether or not to, of course, terminate the review or allow it to expire, or to seek an involuntary landmarking of that property, which would be the first one in a few years.
is it possible for us to tour the building before November 9th?
Yes, those dates will be in the first week of November, roughly, and maybe even into that Monday or Tuesday before the meeting. So,
Okay.
If your schedule allows it, there will be a number of opportunities for you to visit before that review period starts.
Great.
And I highly recommend that everybody go and take a look at it. Unfortunately, we can't go as a group.
There'll be a cap of 2 commissioners there at a time to comply with the Open Meetings Act. And again, one of these meetings, we will we'll have our, I expect I'll be at probably most of them, and then if not all of them, probably all of them, and then we'll have a videographer there for at least one of these as well, so that we can capture that for the public.
Great. That's going to be an interesting process to go through. So lots of questions will come up with that. What else do you have on your agenda?
Yeah, so the second item, in some ways, we in our preservation deliberations are twins, let's say, with the village of Hinsdale. So they have undertaken a similar process in a similar span of time. They recently adopted their revisions, and Chair Bergman asked us to provide you a brief comparison and some background information on that. That's included in the staff report, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that if there are any.
So what's very neat about this is that Lake Bluff and Hinsdale are in some ways kind of at the forefront of offering incentives for preservation rather than offering penalties for demolition. So instead of being the commission that always says, no, no, you can't tear down your house, no, you can't modify your house, no, you can't do that. We're now also trying to get into the business of saying, yes, please landmark your house and avail yourself of these opportunities. Hinsdale, it's a village that has a horrible past history of tearing down essentially the entire center section of its town, has suddenly, over time, come back and fully embraced the preservation construct, if you will. And so they've come up with this. And so I think it's very exciting to see that Hinsdale is doing a great many of the same kinds of things that we're trying to do. So we need to be aware of that and aware that there's good things that we can do with preservation. And so I'll let it go at that.
Okay.
Okay?
I was just thinking it might be, I don't know if it'd be appropriate to share with PCZBA and Finance Committee when we're looking at some of our request for their consideration of change of our ordinance, to see that there are some other towns in the area that are doing that, looking at it in a similar way.
Yeah, so we shared this very chart with the finance committee when they
okay.
had their discussion, and again, so far, different, the other proposal, there may be more, need for an in-depth conversation with the PCZBA potentially, but at least on this first one, there were no objections to where we are so far. Yeah.
Great.
I suppose that does, I would add maybe a fourth one in here quickly. As I mentioned, we are, Chair Bergman, past Chair Kraus have been working with Chair Peters of the PCZBA to do a joint workshop to talk about some of these issues and to emphasize the approach that this body's trying to cultivate. We're looking at doing a joint meeting potentially as soon as the PCZBA's next meeting, November 16th. And I'm wanted to poll this group briefly. We can do this afterwards as well if people aren't sure, just on who could be in attendance on November the 16th. That's the third Wednesday of the month, and we would be looking at either a 6:30 or a 7 o'clock start time.
Is that the History Museum Board Day?
11/17.
11/16, so Wednesday.
I am available.
Somebody say History Museum?
It's History Museum Board meeting,
Oh, is that,
unless it's 7
I
p.m.
had something on there, and I wondered,
See,
I didn't
I
know
don't
what
have
it
that on
was.
my calendar, but that sounds about right.
You know, I did have something down, and I didn't put what it was, so.
Let me go back,
So
let us go back and check on that.
Do you meet the third Wednesdays?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, actually, I thought Kathy was going to move it to the fourth Wednesday.
That's
let me- wait a minute.
that's why I'm hesitating, so let's
Let
go
me
back and
just-
check with her.
let
The
me just
fourth
see.
Wednesday in this case would be,
Thanksgiving,
the day before Thanksgiving, so.
yeah. So we could come,
Yeah.
whose kitchen do we get to sit in and smell somebody else's baking bird?
Burning Bird. So this is a joint meeting of PCZBA and HPC?
That's correct. And so if that board meeting is that night, we'll check and confirm next. No,
Okay.
I believe the majority of this body has to be in attendance at that one too. But even if it is that evening, perhaps we could try for 6:30 or 6:15 if the group's comfortable with it, and give you a chance to have that discussion and then still be able to attend to other commitments.
All right. Let me get back to you.
Okay. The last item, a short but substantive discussion. Back at the end of May, we finished the historic preservation map, the Choose, it's been called variously Choose Lake Bluff or Lake Bluff Online, et cetera, and I'll put that up on the screen here. I think we've shared this a couple times previously. We haven't rolled this out to the public because there was some desire discussion, to have discussions with the commission. Certainly, we would like to get this out pretty soon. Similarly, I'll note, so mostly we've talked about this map. In part, we've been waiting on some other pieces of our new ordinance as well. So there's some new forms. I confess that's part of why you have an older copy of a form there in your packet. We also have tried to make a new interactive landmark list. You know, these lists are out there, but another of the village's interns, Allie Caskey, put this work together.
Nice.
Yeah, the funnest part, we're happy to share this, but you know, I'm a big fan of this right here. This is the, I can, it's all about the fun of one little slider, right? And I'll note too, unlike some of these other pieces we're talking about, maybe what's interesting and kind of what's frustrating here is, you know, I'd worked with Miss Caskey to, you know, we turned over all of the village's files on our actual landmarks, right? So here's the landmark designation and here's the contents of the hearing. Miss Caskey drafted this. I know we had shared it with Kathy O'Hara, and that there was some concerns about, you know, some of the content that was in here, which is a bit something we're gonna have to navigate as far as trying to square up, you know, perhaps at times, you know, some of these proceedings were a little thinner or not as complete as they should have been. But so all of this is to say, we have the puzzle pieces coming together. Unfortunately, just with meeting scheduling issues, it's been hard to, you know, we're at a little bit of a tension point now, just between, you know, wanting to give this group a chance to, you know, participate and shape what we're trying to put out, but also some of this is a bit past due and being published. And so we're looking for your guidance, I would say really first on what your desire expectation is as far as the timing of working with these materials versus the timing of just getting them into the public's hands. And then we can talk about specifics too, I mean, especially specifics about this this map product. We've shared a couple times before if there's any feedback on that. You know, once it's released, we can always come back and edit it, but you know, people will get their first impressions when we release it. So just looking for your guidance, your direction in how to resolve this.
Your thoughts?
Boy, this is a new one on me. I'm gonna have to
Okay.
sit on this.
It's been a while since we've looked at this.
Yeah.
Yes.
We haven't met since June, and we've been working on this for a year and a half or more, probably. And so, yeah, this thing has been sort of clunking along. You guys have done a great job of putting together all of the aggregating tools of being able to pull from all sorts of places. I mean, I'm very intrigued by being able to click on a house and then getting the tax records and then history records and history museum records and all of those pieces.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an amazing.
I know that there are some linkage problems with the History Museum's website, and those are problems internal to the History Museum's database. And, you know, if someone waved their magic wand and we had a whole bunch of interns who could go in there and just do a lot of the legwork that's involved, we could improve that link. That's not our concern, that's the History Museum's concern. I know Steve and I have talked a great deal about adding photographs that we're pretty certain the township has of older photographs of some of the houses. There again, that's a manpower problem, it's not necessarily our problem. So there are some continuing build out and connecting problems here, but do you want to go back and take a further look at this, refamiliarize yourself with it? There's the link that's right here on how to click into it. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of like diving into the rat hole because the rabbit hole.
So I hope it's not a rat hole.
Excuse me for saying that. But it's like diving into the rabbit hole, because you're like, well,
Keep going.
well, now I want to look at my neighbor's house.
Yeah.
Now, I think I'm going to go look at Lois's house. And so you end up doing that, and,
Get out of my house.
an hour later, you're still clicking and clacking with the thing. So it's a lot of fun to play with and look at. And if you're trying to gather some information about a property, or sometimes just carry on a discussion about properties, that this tool, to have this right here is a wonderful tool to have.
My comment would be that it's new capability. It provides access to information that would otherwise be very difficult to get. So even if there are a few broken links, we identify those by usage, right?
Right.
So if we are going for perfection, we're never gonna release it.
That's a good point.
It's gonna be outdated by the time we release it. So but to your point about branding, like, it's people's first experience. So if we're over 80% complete, and we think I always think that's like the benchmark. If we're pretty good on that stuff, then we should release it and do that iterative, have release dates to do updates, or a goal to have the pictures added by a certain date or whatever.
I think that's a
think
great
if we
idea.
don't release it, like, all this work has been sitting there and not realized.
And then it starts getting old and stale.
We don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Because this is amazing,
It is.
in my opinion.
It is, yeah.
What are your plans for when you do the release? Like, how are you going to put it out to the community that we've got this great tool for you all to find out about homes? And
Yeah, so I think, there's still a bit of internal work we're going to sprint and finish out. So part of that is, and I'm looking directly at Mr. Mueller here.
It's gonna be changing. He's the
raise his
sprinter.
head.
Yeah, so we have started a few new sets of forms and things, kind of blanks left in them for the final incentive package. I think we'll leave that part out for now and get those out, especially so your group can continue to do its work. There's just a couple things to do here. So for example, I think we'll put in, we'll have someone make up at least a filler header image. We'll make a name for it. Probably not Lake Bluff Online, as much as it throws me back to America Online. We'll find a slightly different name for it, maybe, choosing Lake Bluff, something of that nature.
Yeah, that's kind of what we started with, I think.
We've always, Steve brought us along with the Choose Lake Bluff
Because it was people
concept.
who were thinking about moving into town. and
Exactly.
So they were gonna research the town.
I mean, you could even have the Village Hall logo there as a picture, and just leave the name there.
Village Hall or the gazebo, there's a lot of
Or it could
very
be something
iconic
that
things for Lake
rotates
Bluff,
through.
I think.
Just as an aside, you might not
Yeah.
have to name it right yet.
Okay. And
Call
then I think, we'll take those pieces and we just need to rewrite the webpage dedicated to this on the village website, which
Finding
is
Lake
not,
Bluff.
it's not that
How's
difficult. but
Finding
just-
Lake Bluff?
That'll be the package, and then we'll put on the front page of the website, we'll put in the Village e-newsletter, and we'll see where the traction. We'll probably announce it to our real estate friends, and we'll see what
We'll
kind of
get, we'll
traction.
get the
we get.
History Museum to write a blurb about it in their
This
newsletter.
is going to be a product of the village, though, right? I mean, who's going to have
Village
the
of Lake
authorship of this? Village of Lake Bluff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's very little that's originally authored, right? I mean,
Right, but I mean,
almost everything in here is from some-
it's the village that's putting all the effort into putting the database together and making the links work and all of that, so.
As opposed to HPC or history.
Right, that's exactly what I was getting at.
So before you do it to like the newsletter, you could release it to a group like the Realtors first, and then let them run it for a month and see what feedback you get from them.
You'd probably
before
get
you
great
do-
feedback from them, yeah.
You could do it to the employees and the committees, and you could do it to the Realtors and then release it,
Do you want,
Some focus
as an
groups.
example.
do we want that to come to us?
Guys,
We want that to come to us first for, take no more than 5 or 6 days to take a look at this and feedback to Glenn, and then go to the realtors, and then go out to the, sort of the larger group of ripples in the pond?
Yeah, like I was thinking all committees. I mean, it could go to the village board members, it could go to us, it could go to history museum
So,
people.
I'm thinking that we would get, we would have a last look, and then we could go to all of the committees in the village, and then out to a larger group, the realtors, and then to the general public? Does that make sense? Do we want to have a last look?
Beta testing 1, beta testing 2.
Well, hopefully it's been beta tested, but yes. What are your thoughts, Glenn?
Yeah, we can work with that. Again, as far as a rollout, you know, for us, it's, you know, the works, you know, not a whole lot of preference as far as how slow or how fast you roll it out. We can work with whatever your direction is.
What do you think your timeline is on fixing it up? Are we,
I mean, we
30
need-
days, 60 days? What?
It's probably shorter than that. I mean, to do the things we talked about were, aside, the landmark, I mean, this particular list, I need to circle back with,
So you have
museum
you have
folks, but
2 or 3 weeks worth of work on this, or something
Probably.
like that, okay? And so then that could come to us for just essentially an email look-see? Okay, it's the kind of thing that takes you a half an hour to take a look at it, and then have some sort of feedback. And then,
this,
are
sorry.
you peeling the onion here?
You know, the military has a certain tendency for having a great deal of bureaucrats in it. No offense, for making the most remarkable illustrations, and so this is a particularly well-known one. Ignore the, you know, this
Yes,
is
okay.
how not to die, basically, but, you know, the onion, growing, layers of the onion, and so,
Okay.
you know, HPC and the
Well, I had a-
committees and the realtors, and, you know, same thing. Concentric circles.
I had a,
Except it's important, you're just asking them to be your testers, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not that you're, well, anyway, I digress.
This is still,
I'm just trying
So
to show.
it's a
off,
good
make sure
analogy.
so my analogy is a general counsel who said that, look, shoot for, in drafting contracts, 80% is your perfection percentile. So, you know, the lawyers will sit there and draft the most beautiful document in the world, and the business never gets consummated, you know, so be 80% and you're at perfection, go do the deal, and make some money, so, okay. So that, I think that's great.
Okay, I think we have some direction. I suspect the timing of this will work out, where we'll, certainly we'll give you an update on where we're at, if we're not at release time, when you meet again here in a couple weeks.
Great. All right, anything else on our agenda? Anything else on our minds?
Yeah, so as a reminder, November 9th, just a couple short weeks away, is your next meeting. Again, not to belabor it, but if we have absences, we come pretty close to having to cancel, so please, if you expect to be out of town, not physically here at Village Hall, please let us know as soon as you can. And then we will work towards, again, schedule permitting, arranging that meeting on the 16th as well with the PCZBA. That's more optional if you're able to be in attendance, but we'll notify you when that's finalized as well, what that date is.
So there was an email from Kathleen that said the next History Museum board meeting is on the 16th at 7. Is there any way we could do it before that meeting?
We could meet earlier, yeah, that begins at 7, and you've offered 6:30.
I'll need to pull the members of the PCZBA, but I think we could probably do 6:02.
We may end up having a meeting here, and then trotting over to the museum and having the next meeting, so we may be doing that as a group.
Yeah, because we're holding them at the,
We're
the street.
just across
Yeah,
the
right,
street at
yeah.
the, no, we're in the Spruce Room these days,
oh, are we? Okay.
so, in any event, it's all downtown, it's all within walking distance, so, okay. So I already have, November 9th, HPC, I already have that on my calendar, so that's good.
Yeah, I'm good for that
Okay,
too.
great. All right, are we we're at the end, finally?
I will move to adjourn.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
I object, I want to talk longer. All right, our motion is, our meeting is adjourned. I want to thank everybody. It's been a long meeting. We haven't had a meeting that's run this long
Good
in quite
meeting.
some time, but we did some really neat things tonight.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for, we landmarked a property, we went through the standards and guidelines. So we're doing all sorts of neat things suddenly.
I love seeing projects like that.
Landmarking?
No, I mean, like, just everything good, you know?
Yeah.
Everything they want to do is great.
Yeah.
And
No,
to your point
that
about
property.
publishing the criteria, they had the criteria, so they worked from it. and worked-
Yeah. So, and actually, Rob Douglas was on this commission 10, 12.
One of the
to-
originals,
Yeah,
or?
he's one of the original guys back in the day, and so he has a sense of how all of this functions. I seem to have an extra copy of this. Anybody want this?
We'll take another
Randolph's?
copy here at Village Hall.
Okay.
Or,
Well, no, I have one. I was just going to say, save it for, you said we're still looking for new members. If the village already has one,
Or Mr. McGuire, maybe?
I was